Hello again, World History 2 students. Mr. Deegan here for another edition of VidNotes videos. And we're talking today about a global transfer of goods called the Columbian Exchange. The Columbian Exchange changed the way people eat. It changed the way people lived. Now we delve into the Columbian Exchange itself. The Columbian Exchange is a term, an idea that was invented by this white-bearded man, Alfred Crosby. In 1972, the historian Crosby wrote a book called The Columbian Exchange to describe how Columbus's discovery of the New World in 1492 led to a hugely important global transfer of plants, animals, and diseases that historians were not studying until this time. And Crosby said, everyone was affected on Earth by the Columbian Exchange. Every society in some way changed. Who participated in this large Columbian Exchange? Well, the Old World and the New World both did. Let's define these areas. First, the Old World are the people and countries in Europe, Asia, and Africa. In other words, the Old World existed in the Eastern Hemisphere. The New World contained people and countries in North and South America. We also have to include the Caribbean islands because they are extremely important in the Columbian Exchange. And the New World is made up of countries in the Western Hemisphere, the hemisphere that hadn't been explored too much by the Eastern Hemisphere. What was exchanged in the Columbian Exchange? Let's talk about the important items. First, from the Old World. Horses and cattle are sent to the New World, and they change the lifestyles of American Indians. You see this Native American with a horse. Important items from the New World that were sent to the Old World: corn, potatoes, tobacco, and tomatoes. And they changed European lifestyles. They changed the European diet. They changed the way that Europeans raised crops and livestock. Also, the Columbian Exchange involved the transfer of diseases across the Atlantic Ocean. Diseases like smallpox, typhus, the whooping cough, and others. Smallpox was the most deadly of these European diseases. It was deadly for the Aztec, the Inca, and other American Indian groups. What did smallpox do that made it so deadly? Well, this virus, and you see it here, a diagram of it, it attacks blood cells, it attacks the skin and organs of your body, and it leads to blindness and respiratory failure. And this is a man lying in a bed. It looks like he has the smallpox virus because he has those red poxes on his skin. The consequences of smallpox in data form. The diseases of the Columbian Exchange, including smallpox, wipe out 50% to 90% of Native Americans, depending on what historian you ask. Let's talk now about the triangular trade. This is different than the Columbian Exchange. It can be confusing, so let's decipher the two. The triangular trade are the actual trade routes from different continents. Why are they called triangular trade? Well, the trade routes make the shape of a triangle. The Columbian Exchange, meanwhile, is not a specific trade route. It's just the general transfer of food and goods and ideas and diseases and people, as we'll learn shortly. So that's the difference between the triangular trade and the Columbian Exchange. Now let's take the triangular trade step by step, starting in the continent of Europe, which is shaded here. Europe trades to Africa guns, ammo, and manufactured cloth, mostly in Western Africa because they can reach this coast most easily by ship. and they then participate in the slave trade of Western Africa. And slaves are sent across the Atlantic Ocean to North, South America, and the Caribbean islands. And this route from Africa to the Americas is called the Middle Passage. More on this later. But what is then brought back to Europe from the Americas? Sugar and rum. The sugar plantations of the Caribbean are vibrant with wealth. And the rum is a product of making an alcoholic beverage out of sugar. And both of these items are wanted greatly in Europe. So they complete the triangular trade routes. The triangular trade also involved exporting precious metals between the eastern and western hemispheres. Now, Hernando Cortés, one of the Spanish explorers, he was an example of an explorer who wanted gold by any means necessary. This is what he said in his journal. We, the Spanish explorers, have a disease of the heart that only gold can cure. Gold and silver were exported to Europe and Asia from the Americas. And these explorers justified enslaving American Indians in gold and silver mines and on sugar plantations. Now, when the smallpox virus kills the Native Americans, the Aztec, the Inca, and others, Spain and Portugal, the early leaders in exploration, start using Africans as slaves. And this is the start of the transatlantic slave trade from Africa to the Americas. And here is the transatlantic slave trade. A lot of it has to do with the harvesting of sugar and sugar cane. Let's look at where the transatlantic slave trade happened. You see what's called the Slave Coast, the west coast of Africa from 1650 to 1860, and all the different routes that these slave ships took. Now notice the majority of the slaves are sent to the West Indies in the Caribbean, 4.5 million, and to South America, especially to Brazil. 5 million slaves end up on plantations in Brazil. Only 500,000 slaves end up on the northeast coast of what will become the United States. The Middle Passage, as we said, this was the leg of the triangular trade routes that deals with the forced transfer of slaves from Africa across the Atlantic Ocean to the Americas. And about 20% of Africans die on each ship during the voyage. Each slave ship had about 20% of Africans die. That's a staggering figure. And you see a sketch of a slave ship and the inhumane way that slaves were packed in the lower level of these slave ships. And what did the lower levels look like? Like this. Slaves were chained to the holds. Some slaves were punished by being thrown overboard, and there were some rebellions. The slaves realized we are outnumbering our owners, so let's plan a rebellion. In fact, as many as 10% of slave ships experienced a slave rebellion of some kind, according to some historians. What were some of the effects of the slave trade? Well, African societies lost generations of their youngest and strongest to European traders and plantation owners who were taking the best to their plantations. This is, as you see, a slave auction, and a mother and a daughter might get broken up here. And that's what also happened. African families were torn apart. Many slave owners did not buy families. They bought individuals and treated them all like property. Another effect of the slave trade was that African culture diffused around the world, to Europe, to South America, to the Caribbean, to North America. So the music and the food of different African groups were spread and diffused. You are almost done with this lesson of Unit 3. Please now answer those summary questions. Let's look at a preview for next lesson, Lesson 4. You are going to be going on a world tour of the Eastern Hemisphere. Until that next lesson, this is Mr. Deegan, signing off.